You are fluent in Latin. After a car accident, you find yourself in a fantasy world. In this world, humans have been slaves to other species, all of whom use magic. Humans have the capability of using magic, but only by learning the elves' language. After hearing it, you find that it is Latin. Verbum Magia Part 1, I died. I was sure of it. The truck had hit me head on, and that had been it. The darkest blackness followed by the brightest white, and then I'd woken up here, wherever here was. The buildings were like nothing I'd ever seen before. I was pretty sure that a good third of them were living trees with buildings inside them. Then there were the stone monstrosities, not castles per se, but more like above-ground caves, or inside out. I'm not sure. I'd not been inside one yet. Humans weren't allowed. That was the kicker, the real I'm not in Kansas anymore moment. Elves, orcs, dwarves, dragons, you name it from fantasy, and it's here. And the elves ruled it all. I'd only met one or two so far, been issued a few short commands, and sent on my way. I was a slave, I guess. I was fed and housed, and they hadn't made me do anything yet, but others did. It was also apparently normal for humans to just arrive here. I wasn't the first, nor was I the only one from Earth, but no one seemed to want to talk about home. It almost felt as if they'd forgotten about it since they'd been here. It made my skin crawl. "You there?" an orcish guard said, pointing at me and gesturing me over. It was early in the morning, and I'd been just about to line up for breakfast. Taken aback, I looked over my shoulder as if there might be someone standing there behind me. But I'd been the last one to leave our bunk area and was most definitely the one he was talking to. "Yes, sir?" I asked politely. I'd seen guards like him beat others when they weren't respectful enough. "You're due for your job assignment today. Follow me." He glared at me, as if daring me not to follow him. My stomach grumbled once as the smell of fried eggs and whatever that tuber-like vegetable was they fed us floated past. But I didn't stop to look back. I was hungry, not stupid. We exited the low structure that we humans lived in and crossed a small plaza to one of the living tree buildings. I wanted to ogle around myself, but I'd been told to keep my eyes down and keep quiet. The others knew that I'd be assessed soon, and they had at least shared that experience with me. It should be mostly painless, and if I was biddable enough, quick. Up 2 flights of stairs that seemed to be floating on air, not suspended by the tree or anything else I could see, and I was in a small room. The orc mumbled something to an elvish woman in dark orange robes and then headed out. The woman turned her gaze from him to me. "Sit." There was no gesture, and the words were spit out as if she loathed speaking to me. I did as she commanded. In the only chair in the room, I sat, perched uneasily on the edge. I'd been a scholar back home, or as my parents seemed to call it, a forever student, getting out of paying my loans by continuously enrolling in more classes. There were humans here who curated the elvish libraries, and I hoped I'd be assigned a role like that. I wasn't exactly the physical labor body type. My focus stayed on the elf, who was pacing back and forth looking at me, disdain written across her face. "Name?" she asked, though we both knew it didn't matter. She'd be assigning me a new one momentarily anyway. "Drew." I kept it short and to the point. No need for my titles or even last name. She frowned for a moment, then said, "Lean back." I did, though I could feel my heart thudding in my chest as I moved. I was anxious, and I just wanted this to be over with. She walked behind the chair, hovered her hands on either side of my head, and started chanting. "Indica mihi, est natura eius, ostende me, quid." Latin? She was speaking Latin, but her hands were glowing an ominous red, and she'd asked for it to reveal my nature? I couldn't help it. My head twisted to look up at her. Her eyes narrowed, and as she said, "Stop moving," a small spark of magic shocked me. She started speaking again, and more Latin followed. I couldn't believe it. Magic here was powered by Latin, one of my 3 language degrees. She'd now started to command the magic to change me, to make me forget. Even as she spoke, I could feel my memories fuzz, and in a panic I asked the first thing that came to mind. "Cur Latin loqui, why are you speaking Latin?" And she stopped speaking mid-word. Eyes wide, she stared at me in horror. "You should not know the language of our people, you heathen," she said, her voice pitched high and her hands dropping away from my head. With her hands gone and her spell incomplete, my mind cleared, and my first instinct was to issue a command of my own in Latin. "Me solum relinquatis," or "Leave me alone." Gold essence seemed to issue forth with my words, and even as I spoke, she turned and left the room, leaving me all alone. Enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe and comment. Your support helps us create more stories just for you. All right, let's continue the story. Verbum Magia Part 2. I couldn't believe it. She'd actually left. I stared at the door that she'd shut behind her for a few loud heartbeats, then looked around the room frantically. There was the chair I'd been sitting in, a small desk with papers on it, another staircase going up, and the door I'd come in, which the elvish woman had left through. Great. Just great. I glanced out the window and confirmed what I already knew. I was too high up to jump without hurting myself. Stepping back, I looked at the door again. I had no idea how long my magic would last, or if it had done anything other than actually make her leave. What if she was standing outside the door right now, trying to work out how to come back in? On the desk were a couple of notes, with only one that caught my attention, as it was written in Latin. I shook my head in disbelief that the magic here was powered by a dead language. A dead language I'd wasted several years learning too. The note read, "Assessment of arrival due by 327.33.14. New arrivals soon. Workers low in onyx mines and fishing farms." I rolled my eyes, knowing that I likely would have been sent to the mines to work, knowing my luck. But the new arrivals part bothered me. Were they bringing us humans to this world? The elf had tried to make me forget my previous life, and the other humans that I knew were from Earth never would speak of it. My stomach dropped, and I wondered for a moment if it would have been better to actually die when the truck hit me. My attention was ripped away from the note as I heard footsteps outside the door. With no other options, I headed up the strange floating stairs. I found myself in a small study, and the clear top of the tree building, as there was no roof, only open branches above me. I could see a bird's nest and even a small squirrel-like animal. The walls of the study held hundreds of books, most of which were in Latin, from the titles written in gold on their spines. There was nowhere else for me to go, and I doubted I had much time left before someone came chasing after me. I didn't think they'd kill me. I'd seen all kinds of poor behavior in the bunks, punished with nothing more than a severe beating. But then again, I hadn't seen anyone other than the elves use magic, and even then they held out with physical means before turning to the arcane. As I read the titles, my translation skills stretched for the first time since I'd graduated with that degree. I found myself reaching for more than one book. There were whole novels written on how they'd grown the tree buildings and how they'd carved the strange stone buildings. I realized then that this study must have a prestigious owner if they had a collection of books like that here. A shorter title caught my attention. Fire. I found myself reading the title aloud, and as I did so, flames burst forth into existence before me. They were hot. I stepped back quickly, but the flames were starved for kindling, having come to life from nothing. Before I could even register that I'd summoned flames, the whole study was ablaze. I turned towards the stairs, only to find myself face to face with an angry orc and the elvish woman. Her face paled as she saw the study, but she did not run away. "Extinguish your flame," she said, her voice quiet and steady. Her eyes burned me nearly as hot as the flame, and I considered jumping out the window to flee. "Speak not a word, move not a muscle," she said sharply as I opened my mouth to tell her to leave again. The words died in my throat, and my muscles down to my eyelids ceased all movement. Terrified, I watched out of the corner of my unmoving eyes as the orc approached me. I was going to be restrained, or worse, I could tell from the grim set of his expression and the way he was balling his fists. At the same time, however, I couldn't help but be fascinated by the way the elvish woman cast her magic. It seemed like everything she did needed to be precise and deliberate. Perhaps that's why just saying fire had caused such a blaze. I hadn't added any control or boundaries to it. A cold tingle ran down my spine. I wondered briefly how this magic worked. Its power didn't seem rooted in intent, but in exactness. What might have happened if someone miscalculated a single word? Could the outcome spiral far beyond their intent? So caught up in thought, I'd nearly forgotten about the orc. Forgotten until his fist came down near me, his actions intending to subdue me further. For a moment, I saw stars, and then, much like my death, everything faded into blackness. Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Your support means a lot.